Welcome back. I see the upper mids have moved down. It's great. Seniors aren't here with us. Welcome. And everyone's moved down. Just a quick announcement before. Mr. MacDonald is our guest speaker this morning. He's a teacher here, and most of you know Mr. MacDonald. He's spoken before. But right after he speaks, Mr. Frew from the admissions office wants to talk to us, show us a short video, talk to us about return visits coming up. So I'm going to welcome Mr. MacDonald up.
All right. Good morning. So yes, I'm Mr. MacDonald, and as Mr. Ganong just told you, I happen to be a teacher at Taft, just in case you did not know. So similar to my meeting last year, there's going to be an abundance of I in this speech, as well as many sweeping generalizations, especially regarding the word people. Okay? But I hope that everyone had a restful break and is ready to start the spring term. So before delving into the content of this morning meeting, I wanted to take the time to pat myself on the shoulder, because I think this topic presented difficulty on many fronts. I meant to raise awareness on an issue, but I think I may possibly only raise more confusion. So I also must take the time to publicly apologize to my sophomore history students who've already been privy to some of this information while they studied China. I also want to extend my sincere gratitude towards Mrs. Orban, who helped with all aspects of this speech. The topic for today's meeting is germane to all present, which is actually the reason I chose it. It affects everyone in this room, albeit in very different reasons, or very different ways, excuse me. That being said, it still comes off as a taboo subject in society. Today I'm going to present my thoughts on drugs, the idea of addiction, dependency, and what it means to get high. These thoughts will no doubt be scattered as I am boldly attempting to include history, literature, science, and psychology into a 15-minute block. I will definitely fail. I apologize for not including the visual prompts that I had planned to utilize. I was forced to dismiss them as a means to save time. So for resources, I utilized the teachers at Taft. I extensively also utilized 3 different libraries, and the internet also served well in this journey to find this information. So those 3 terms I just mentioned, drugs, the idea of addiction or dependence, and then the idea of getting high, should be further defined for our use. So drugs, they are substances that alter mood, thoughts, or behavior as a result of changes in the functioning of the brain. Right? And I'm going to throw in alcohol to that category too. So addiction and dependency. There are 2 terms that, although they are actually different, they're used synonymously today. In short, the term dependence is increasingly used for physical dependency on a drug, while addiction is more often used for psychological dependencies. And in my terms, the word high means just a state of elevated mood. Okay? So, more reasons for why I chose this topic. I feel as, number one, Taft as a community has had its fair share of drug-related problems this year. Drugs and the problems or benefits of them, they simply surround us. They're apparent in many aspects of our lives. And also, because I remember the drug education I received when I was growing up. 2 things sort of come to mind. We had these posters that just say no. And we also had a commercial. This was a little before my time, but it was still prevalent, definitely in the 90s. This is your brain on drugs. Showed an egg, a whole egg. This is your brain, and then when the egg fell and splattered on the ground, that was your brain on drugs. So the expanse of my drug awareness in high school and college was deficient, to say the least. I found that those, they just simply said why not to do them, or told you not to do them, but did not explain why not to do them. So if there is any goal in my scattered and lofty presentation, it is that of raising awareness to the issue. I don't expect many of you to turn down drugs just because Mr. MacDonald said to do so, or he said they were bad. I'm attempting to tell you why they are appealing to many, why they are in turn bad, and what it is that they actually do to you. Okay? While researching, I found myself generating many questions about, obviously, drugs, addiction, and getting high. In short, most of the questions were similar in their direction and scope. Most began with the word why. One in particular, so I was why do people choose to do drugs? The answer is actually quite subjective. One example of a very common theme amongst users is the mind-altering properties, or that is that it makes you experience better ways of thinking that are inherent with drugs and alcohol. The matter of the fact remains that each person chooses drugs for their own reasons. So when I looked into the why, I only created further mystery, so I decided to look into the when. I chose to further study people and the decisions they've made over time in regard to drugs. To complete this task, I of course turned to history. As it seems, people have interacted with drugs and alcohol for a long, long time. People have used these for literally thousands of years. In fact, drugs may have been used prior to the 3rd millennium BC. People have looked for, found, cultivated, mass-produced, franchised, researched, and chemically enhanced these products in an attempt to elevate their moods. They do so because the world as it is cannot provide them with the desired feeling that a drug can. I'd also go so far as to say that some people have completely dismissed the notion of finding joy in reality. Although with a very pessimistic view, it can hardly be argued that among all the wonderful traits that are inherent among humans, we really do have a particular proclivity for evading reality. In my study of history, I also found that people, whether they outwardly express it or not, are consumed by desire. Desire is a sense of wanting, the feeling of working for and attaining a goal. People are always inclined to want more. Give them an inch and they'll take a mile is the old adage. I believe this applies to mood and feelings as well. People will always make an earnest attempt to feel the best they possibly can. With that in mind, you should understand that drugs and alcohol, and all the effects that come with them, are going nowhere. There will always be some way of getting high, because it's natural for people to want that. Even if all the current drugs were destroyed, people would create other drugs. It's already happened. So you will live your entire life as a member of a drug-consuming community at large, and that is a fact. Human culture is inundated with the idea of evading reality, especially with regards to drugs. It's funny, we stipulate that drugs and alcohol need regulation and laws in societies, yet consistently make positive references to them in everyday culture. I find that these culture references, our peers usually make the greatest impression on us. So let's take a look at some examples, ancient and contemporary, of people that have or are making an impact on others in some way because of a connection to drugs. So here's a few members that I put in the category of history or politics. Marcus Aurelius was a famous user of opium. He was a Roman emperor. Hitler, from World War II, was famous for using methamphetamine. Bill Clinton was also famous for smoking marijuana, as well as being the president of the United States. But apparently he didn't inhale, so I guess it doesn't count. So some of the other categories I kind of looked at for people were the members of the literature and the art circles. So Lewis Carroll allegedly wrote the work Alice in Wonderland, who I'm sure many have heard of, while tripping on mushrooms. Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote his ultimate Kubla Khan while on opium. Allegedly, Stephen King wrote most of his works while on cocaine. So did Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde while on a 6-week cocaine binge. Ken Casey wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, allegedly on mescaline. Charles Dickens was a high user of opium. He wrote Great Expectations and A Tale of Two Cities. Alexander Dumas was a hashish user, as was Victor Hugo, who respectively wrote The Count of Monte Cristo and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm sure most have heard of Ernest Hemingway, who wrote The Old Man and the Sea and The Sun Also Rises. He was an alcoholic as well as a drug user. Keats used opium. Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote The Raven and the Telltale Heart, he was an opium user. So was Pablo Picasso. Jules Verne, who wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, used cocaine. Vincent van Gogh and Oscar Wilde were both absinthe users. Other authors that have drug and alcohol associations. J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter. She writes about these two substances, one called butterbeer, one called fire whiskey. She also, as we all know, is a very popular author with a huge audience. Most of the Harry Potter readers will read her next book, called The Casual Vacancy, which is admittedly very different than Harry Potter and presents a quite more a lot of drugs, let's say. Another author, J.R.R. Tolkien. All right, he's famous for creating the idea of Middle Earth. So in all of the books and movies, in particular the newly released Hobbit, there are many drug and alcohol references. In The Hobbit, there's a scene that pays homage to the many drug references of Tolkien, where Gandalf offers Radagast some of his old Toby, the finest weed in the land. I'm sure many have read or heard about the vampire sagas called Twilight. Part of the story was actually taken out during the editing phase. Among the many edits, Stephanie Meyer and a publisher decided to cut out Bella's experience with prescription painkillers. There's a contemporary novel out called Crank, which many of you may have read about methamphetamine. A lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of this book called The Hunger Games. Apparently there's a drug called Morphling, which has very similar effects as morphine does. Some of the other people from music and entertainment, Louis Armstrong and Ray Charles, big drug users. The top rock bands, in my opinion, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Queen, Pink Floyd, all huge drug users. Eric Clapton, Kurt Cobain, The Doors, Janis Joplin, Bob Marley, Elvis Presley, all famous for using drugs. Rap, Lil Wayne. Sure people want to understand what's in his cup. Jay-Z, Kanye, Rick Ross. They're all famous for their associations with drugs. Even country music. Kid Rock came out with a song a few years ago, All Summer Long. Zach Brown Band and Toes. And even years ago, Johnny Cash and Cocaine Blues. All had connotations with drugs. Actors. I don't know if many students in here have heard of Chris Farley, but he was hilarious until he died of an overdose. Jack Nicholson. Richard Pryor used drugs. Sigmund Freud, psychologist, was famous for his cocaine use. Sports players. So there's many athletes that use drugs in many ways. And considering I know football the best, I'll use some famous examples. Lawrence Taylor, one of the best linebackers and football players to ever play, was famous for using cocaine. And Brett Favre was a noted painkiller abuser. But athletes don't only use drugs for their high that they get, but also for the performance benefit. Categorize it how you may, but using a performance enhancer falls into evading reality in my book, because feats that are accomplished under the influence of drugs are not natural and not realistically attained. So some of the effects that drugs have on you. So there's basically two types. There's stimulants, and they usually affect the central nervous system, and they cause a feeling of speeding up. And then there's depressants, which usually affect the central nervous system and cause the feeling of slowing down. So how drugs are utilized. They are injected, smoked, inhaled, snorted, or swallowed. And how they affect the body is called pharmacology. Some of the factors that, when figuring out the pharmacology of some drugs, you have to consider the time taken to consume the drug. Was it 10 minutes or 10 hours? The user's tolerance with regard to the drugs. Do they use it often or not? And then the user's gender, the size, and the amount of muscle on the body. So I kind of want to take a look at what these drugs do to your body. And I have to sort of give out a warning and an apology. I'm probably going to botch the biology of this whole thing here. But that was the goal, is to explain what these drugs are actually doing to you. So I will apologize to the science departments, especially those of people in bio, because I will definitely mess this up. And I will be very brief and rudimentary with it. But basically what happens is drugs work in the brain through what are called modulatory networks. Okay? Basically, they're a bunch of nerves in your brain that instead of doing the work themselves, they act as control centers and they alter how the different parts of the brain work. When they work normally, they keep mental traffic moving smoothly. The modulatory networks wake us up, put us to sleep, make us dream, and so forth. Although they don't process information themselves, they are vital for our state of mind. So they affect many things, including our emotions and our alertness. There are 4 major modulatory networks in your brain. There are 4 major ones that are affected by drugs, as well as many others. There's serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine, of which the first 3, again, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, are germane to us because they're relevant to the drugs that I'm going to include in this talk. Serotonin is a system that sends messages to the rest of your brain by releasing these chemicals. It's important for managing mood, appetite, sleep, and dreaming. If it becomes low, you may become irritable, anxious, depressed, and have trouble sleeping. The opposite is also true. By increasing serotonin, you can relieve anxiety. Dopamine. Dopamine is most famous for its stimulant and pleasurable effects and appears to be important in learning. Drugs that significantly elevate dopamine levels tend to make people euphoric, confident, aggressive, and hyperactive. In the opposite direction, drugs that can suppress dopamine are sedating at high doses, causing loss of consciousness and amnesia. Because they are pleasurable, drugs that strongly elevate dopamine levels tend to be very powerful reinforcing agents, meaning the user is often highly motivated to continue their use. And then there is norepinephrine, which is very similar to dopamine, or it's also called noradrenaline. It produces alertness, focus, and motivation. So basically, drugs affect these transmitter sites in the brain, and that's how the effects are given on the body. So when talking about these drugs, which I eventually am going to get to, I decided to include some history, some personal stories, and some anecdotes that I picked up along the way. So drug number one, and again, these are going to affect anyone in this room for various reasons. This one happens to be legal. It's called tobacco. So it comes in many forms, most notably cigars, cigarettes, and chewing tobacco. So some common names, as I just mentioned, cigars, cigarettes, smoke, cigs, butts, darts. Smokeless tobacco is also called chew, dip, spit, snuff, or chaw. And the main chemical that you should worry about with tobacco is nicotine. And basically how chewing tobacco will work is you'll be chewing on this substance and there's pieces of glass in it that will rip open part of your jaw, letting the nicotine flow into your system. That's just the chewed version of it. Basically it affects as a stimulant and a depressant, but it also has some negative effects. It's quite addicting, it makes you smell funny, and you have a higher chance of attaining cancer, and it will greatly decrease your lung function if you are an athlete. Also, when you smoke a cigarette, you're actually inhaling carbon monoxide, tar, formaldehyde, cyanide, and ammonia. So in the 40 years between 1964 and 2004, cigarette smoking caused an estimated 12 million deaths, including 4.1 million deaths from cancer, 5.5 million deaths from cardiovascular disease, and 1.1 million deaths from respiratory disease, and 94,000 infant deaths related to mothers smoking during pregnancy. So one of the stories I wanted to bring up with regards to cigarettes is something from my past. So I remember there was a boy named Tommy down the street. In this story in particular, there was a summer night, just like every summer night growing up, my adolescence. We're playing a game called Ghost in the Graveyard, which is essentially a tweaked version of tag. But so we decided we'd steal 2 packs of my dad's cigarettes first. He smoked a brand called Wave Lights. So we lit a few up. We must have been, I don't know, 12 or 13. And damn it if we weren't the toughest kids ever. I remember feeling so in the moment. It was a complete YOLO event. We are talking a mix of crazy emotions. One being terror because I just stole from my dad. I was a bit exhilarated because I was smoking a cigarette, and that was so cool. And I had a little bit of case of nausea from the slightly too deep inhale that I just had. And I also felt completely disappointed because my formative years were built in part by the mysticism and the grit that came with smoking. These characteristics were portrayed in every form of media and entertainment imaginable. I was caught off guard by the experience and really wanted to know why people would consistently smoke. So we ended up playing the game later on that night with some other kids from around the block and later called it a night. But the most enduring memory of my cigarette incident came the day after. I went over to see if Tommy wanted to hang out, but it seemed he had gotten caught. I guess his dad smelled the cigarettes. I'm not actually sure if he refused to rat me out or his dad never asked, but I got away with it. Tommy, on the other hand, his father made him smoke the rest of the pack, one cigarette after another, and he became quite ill. I think it should also be known that I dominated that game of Ghost in the Graveyard among my friends. All right. Next is alcohol. Alcohol, some common names for alcohol: booze or sauce, the hard stuff. Alcohol usually comes from fermented grains, vegetables, and fruit. Some of the types are the derivatives: beer, wine, hard alcohol. And the effects: they serve as a depressant or relaxant on the body, and they trigger euphoria and confidence. Some of the negatives associated with alcohol: very addictive, and it alters the motor control, slowed responses, And it creates a prevalence for binging or the feeling of wanting to finish the bottle or chug or compete to drink in some way. Each year, approximately 5,000 people under the age of 21 die as a result of underage drinking. This includes about 1,900 deaths from car accidents, 1,600 homicides, 300 suicides, and hundreds of other deaths due to accidents. Statistics actually show that more teens are killed by alcohol than by all illegal drugs combined. Another story of mine associated with alcohol. I was recently in Nova Scotia, Canada a few months ago, and I've been thinking about this meeting for quite a while now, so I brought up the idea to a few of my older cousins. So a story from my cousin Natalie will always stick with me for the rest of my life. She lives in British Columbia, which is on the western coast of North America. And the story pertained to how bad the alcoholism around that part of Canada is, especially in the northern parts of the provinces. Some areas have problems with teens who, as a means to attain alcohol, they decide to drink the contents of hand sanitizer machines. And the increased prevalence among teens using this method, which usually will result in a hospital visit because they are poisoned, created such a burden on some towns that they were forced to lock all hand sanitizer, mouthwash, other alcohol-containing products in secure areas that were sold in stores. That's alarming. Next product, or next drug, marijuana. Now, there's a lot of common names for this one, but dope, ganja, grass, MJ, pot, bud, reefer, weed, fire, hydro. Main methods of delivery usually are smoked, eaten, or vaporized. And the main chemical is called THC. So there's some derivatives, hash, oil, you can put it in food or waxes. And it serves as a depressant, although it can be stimulating. It's euphoric, pain relief, and it's also mildly hallucinogenic. So marijuana at a young age can result in a structural and functional deficits of the brain. It's caused you to develop weakened verbal communication skills, lowered learning capabilities, and a shortened attention span. Limits your brain's effectiveness, slows your thinking, and impairs your coordination. A number of studies also show an association between chronic marijuana use and increased rates of anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia. So just the idea of marijuana, this drug, in trying to talk about it, it gave me the largest degree of difficulty while preparing for the speech. So you have to remember, I wanted to tell you why drugs are bad, or that they are bad and why they're bad. In fact, as many don't understand why one natural product is illegal, yet the other isn't. So I decided to do this morning meeting sometime last semester. I remember talking to Mrs. Orban about months ago as we talked about the sources and scientific proof. And I know it's fairly well known that the research on marijuana has produced some extremely conflicting results, as some argue the effects on brain cells and memory, while others debunk these claims as quite false. And they instead they cite the pain-killing qualities of the drug. That being said, I remember feeling quite confident that I could find some scholarly journal or article or a study that could serve as proof for my arguments on the negative effects of the drug. Then November 6th happened. So along with the minor news of the President Obama being reelected, Colorado and Washington passed ballot that effectively, under state law anyways, legalized marijuana possession. So being a history teacher, this day was quite interesting to me for both reasons. But then the dread hit. I remember feeling, how am I possibly going to stand in front of a few undereducated people and announce the negatives of marijuana when 2 states in America just declared the substance legal? So it was quite daunting. So to get to the point, what is bad for you about marijuana? According to many, like I said, the answer is simple. Because you're young and adults are old. There are quite a few studies that support this claim. The idea is that as adolescents, your body is still growing and should not be interfered with. Mrs. Getty Benedict of the Taft School here summed it up to me a long time ago very, very succinctly. Think about it. If you're growing and things are developing, why screw with that whole process? The next drug I thought was very appropriate today. Opiates. So the main chemical in opiates is morphine. So some of the ways that they're delivered are smoked or intravenously. Some other names are heroin or methadone, Demerol, oxycodone, hydrocodone. And they affect, they serve as a depressant, and they produce extreme euphoria in a dreamlike state or a trance. So a little history on these. So this is more of a US-based history, although there's some aspects of the world in it. Opium is a substance from the poppy plant. It's found in abundance in the Middle East and the Southwest Asia areas. These places are nicknamed the Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle, respectively, for their abundance of these products. Historically speaking, opium has been used for thousands of years, but came of note in China during the 18th and 19th centuries. During the 19th century, immigrants from many countries found new homes in the U.S., and among these were the Chinese, who, in addition to the innumerable benefits they brought, happened to introduce opium to the streets of San Francisco. Also during the 19th century came the discovery of morphine, the chemical in opium that produces the desired pain-killing effects. I mentioned previously the effects of opiates. So morphine derives its name from the effects it has on people. Morphine comes from the Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams. It has a dream-like effect on you. So, coupled with this new painkiller came the syringe, which provided patients the means of delivering the medicine with heightened benefits. The efficacy of the morphine was much more intense, and the duration was extended. Then the mid-19th century, war broke out in the U.S. Now, it seems almost sacrilege to sum up the Civil War in the following fashion, but we're bounded by time here. So the Civil War was not only brutal for being fought between citizens of the same country, but the increased technology in terms of military firearms created an unprecedented bloodbath. There were terrible wounds of all shapes and sizes, wounds that were perfect breeding grounds for infection. Seeing how penicillin, which is our contemporary everyday antibiotic, would not be invented for many years, field doctors, in an attempt to stop the infections, would simply amputate the necessary body parts. As you can imagine, inherent with the field amputation is intense pain. So during the coalescing period, thousands of soldiers were given morphine to subdue the pain. Its effects were so good it was called God's own medicine. Then people started to realize the terrible addictive qualities of the substance, leading to morphine addictions to be called soldier's disease, as a high proportion of the addicts were former soldiers. In the latter years of the 19th century, diacetylmorphine is produced. Bayer, the company you should all know, was commonly known for producing aspirin, began to produce diacetylmorphine under the trade name heroin. They touted this new drug as having the same pain-killing effects as morphine, yet without the addictive qualities. Thinking they'd chosen an apt name for the drug that would save or be a hero to the morphine addicts, they chose heroin. In truth, one could actually buy Bayer brand heroin in stores. Heroin did not become a problem on the epidemic level in the U.S. until the latter half of the 20th century. Now, heroin is one of the more terrible addictions of the illicit drugs. Not only is it psychologically appealing, but the body becomes physically dependent on it, making the withdrawal seem like torture. Heroin as a drug will kill a person by essentially slowing down their heart and lungs to an eventual stop. It can also be a possible target for diseases by sharing needles. So some of the other crazy stories I found that were associated with heroin. It's so bad these days that because there's many diseases that are being spread, that actually medical professionals are giving out needles to heroin addicts just so they won't spread more diseases. And they've created a drug called Narcan, which any of those who have overdosed on opiates, especially heroin, this is the drug that basically saves your life from an overdose, and they give this out to heroin addicts too. I watched a few movies on the use of this drug called Narcan and its effects, and it's quite sad because many of the people, after waking up from their overdose, they're upset that their life was just saved because the best high of their life was just lost. So that's how messed up this drug could be. The other story, I can't help but think about my mom. Not that she's ever touched heroin, but just the idea of a mom's love. Obviously, I couldn't speak for their experience because I don't have it, but many people say that a mom's love, the bond between a mom and her children is an unbreakable thing. But there are many stories of how this drug, heroin, was able to seep into the lives of many people and in fact stop their mothers from even caring about their children anymore. But stepping back and thinking about it, do I really think that any of you will be shooting morphine or heroin? No, absolutely not. But those two drugs are prevalent to us because they're chemically similar to the narcotic pills that are still used today. And in fact, morphine is actually still widely used. So the main narcotics today are oxycodone and hydrocodone. Some examples that you may have heard of in your life are Lortabs or Vicodin, Percocet, and OxyContin. the last of which has created many problems recently. OxyContin was given the nickname hillbilly heroin. So what is it about OxyContin that was actually a bad thing? So oxy was the drug, and the word contin means continuous. It was supposed to be an all-day drug for pain relief, but people would break them open and start to inject the medicine to get the effects quickly, therefore abusing them, which led to many stories of kids ripping off pharmacies because they were highly addicted to this drug. Luckily, it has been put out of use or abandoned and shelved. So with thinking about those types of drugs, you start thinking about more pills. Right? The problem with pill form of drugs is that there is no work to be done to use them. They're easily concealable and are simply ingested like food. There's no smell, they're not big. So other drugs that may be associated with you and that commonly come in pill form are barbiturates or sleeping drugs like Nembutal or Amitol, benzodiazepines, which are very prevalent among prep schools as well as teens and adults. These are things like Xanax or Ativan or Klonopin, and sleep medications like Lunesta or Ambien. The drugs are meant to give a sedative effect, and most are prescribed for sleep or as an anti-anxiety medication. So barbiturates came about in the early 20th century, whereas the benzos came to prevalence during the 1960s. So for the last category of drugs, I decided to pair the two nastier stimulants together, and those being cocaine and methamphetamine, which are both non-pill form drugs. So common names: coke, blow, ice, meth, glass. Both make one feel extremely confident, euphoric, and ready to go. They also happen to rot the nasal cavity, result in diminished brain function, and the increased prevalence of depression and agitation. And methamphetamine actually usually will result in a process known as meth mouth. You should Google it. It'll basically the teeth dry out and the chemicals that are used in the drug affect the mouth in a way that creates just almost like a zombie look. It's pretty terrible looking. So cocaine is the main chemical in cocaine, but there's some additional problems that are associated with cocaine, that being involved in the way that the drug is. It's a powder form, so it can be cut or added to so people can make more money off it. One example in New York City a few years ago that I just researched was that somebody cut their cocaine with a certain drug that happened to be a flesh-eating substance, and many people in New York City that used that particular brand were their faces were eaten in some way by this flesh-eating disease. It has a big influence in New York City and these big cities, and is considered an upper-class drug as it is quite expensive. So meth presents a terrifying nationwide epidemic that has indeed almost crept in to consume men and women of all ages from the Pacific to the Atlantic. It is making its way eastward. It is made from a conglomerate of materials, all of which are easily attainable by any citizen. So when thinking about meth, I can't help to also think about a student and a teacher here at Taft. That's Danilo. Not that Danilo has ever done drugs in his life. It's just that the only thing that Danilo and I happen to have in common is we both watched the show Breaking Bad. This is a show about a high school chemistry teacher who happens to be involved with methamphetamine. Okay? We got to talking to one day at sit-down dinner. We talked about it, and he was amazed when I told him that Mr. Parenti, our chemistry teacher, would be able to produce this product just like any other chemistry teacher, just like the ones in this story, which is true. That's the problem with this drug. It's dangerous to the people making it and dangerous to the neighborhood where it's being made. White phosphorus can produce poisonous phosphane gas, usually as a result of overheating red phosphorus. It can blow up these meth labs. In addition to these gases, various hazardous vapors may be associated with the meth lab, such as chloroform, ether, acetone, ammonia, hydrochloric acids, methylamine, iodine, hydroiodic acid, lithium or sodium, mercury, and hydrogen, which are all, as you can imagine, consumed in some form by the meth user. An interesting fact I found out about methamphetamine was they have trucker bombs. Truckers are famous for using meth because it's this form of speed. They're able to travel a long distance faster. So they will, instead of stopping on their truck routes, use the bathroom in a bottle like this and throw it out the window. And because that truckers are associated with methamphetamine use or speed use, Many meth heads will go searching the roads in an attempt to find urinated bottles just in case they have methamphetamine in them. And from there, you can imagine what they do with them. So again, here are my thoughts and opinions, as well as compiled information and experiences I have on the topic of drugs. So I kind of wanted to share one more personal story with you guys too. So as you guys know, this is my second year here, and I tell my students this a lot, and the faculty I work with, I like my job a lot, I really do. I find that I'm quite comfortable with most people here. It's good to have that sense of family. So I feel comfortable telling you guys these stories about myself. And I'm not afraid to share that I get high every day. I really do. It's just something that I feel like I have to do. Getting high is very important to me. I walk around every day with my paraphernalia, and most of you don't even notice it, which is okay. It's fine. But I find that I must get high every day. It's just the feeling I get when I step out of that pool every morning. I'll tell you, it's absolutely amazing. The idea of this the endorphin rush, that's what makes me get up every morning to do it. Mr. Chung and Mr. Murphy, they come with me to do the same thing. So the point is here that there are alternate forms of getting high. The idea of you do not need to do a drug to actually get high or attain that elevated mood. You can get this feeling the same way by doing things like exercise. Okay? So I know we have to finish up here for Mr. Ganang, Mr. Fru, but I'm going to leave you with a quote of what I think about life and drugs, which I really think sums up my idea on the topic. Okay? So I think when it comes to these substances, and you're going to be faced with them someday in your life, you need to think about something that one of my favorite characters in literature has said. His name is Albus Dumbledore from Harry Potter. And he said, "Does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live." Make sure you do something in life that's worthwhile, folks. Don't turn to drugs.